Hey, I get it, you're staring at a mountain of gaming laptops, trying to figure out whether you're about to waste a chunk of your paycheck on a machine that ends up gathering dust. You want something that actually powers through your favorite titles, handles work projects, and maybe even survives a few coffee spills, but you also don't want to be the person who buys a beast only to discover it's overkill for the games you actually play. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The ASUS ROG Strix G16 is positioned as a high-end all-in-one for serious gamers who also need a workhorse. At first glance the specs read like a mini supercomputer, an Intel i9-14900HX that can turbo up to 5.8 GHz, an RTX 4070 GPU, 32 GB of DDR5 memory, and a 2 TB SSD. It also throws in a 16-inch QHD display that refreshes at 240 Hz with a 3 milliseconds response time, plus Windows 11 Pro and a lifetime Office license. That's a lot of firepower, but the real question is whether all those pieces translate into everyday value for you. Let's start with the type of gamer who actually benefits from this setup. If you spend most of your weekend racing through Forza Horizon at 1080p, or you're mostly in indie titles that don't tax the GPU, you'll probably never tap the RTX 4070's full potential. In that scenario, the laptop's high-end CPU and massive SSD may feel like a luxury you never needed. On the flip side, if you're aiming to game at 1440p with ultra settings, think Cyberpunk 2077 or Elden Ring, and you also run game development tools, 3D rendering software, or multiple VMs for a freelance tech gig, the Strix G16's configuration starts to make sense. The RTX 4070 can hold its own at 1440p without dipping below 60 frames per second on most modern titles, and the i9's extra cores keep background streaming, voice chat, and a few productivity apps from choking the frame rate. Now, what about day-to-day usability? The 16-inch QHD panel is where you'll notice the most immediate benefit. The 240 Hz refresh rate isn't just a bragging right, it actually smooths out fast shooters, reducing motion blur when you're tracking enemies at warp speed. I tested a few titles: Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, and Apex Legends, and the difference between 60 Hz and 240 Hz is noticeable, especially during quick turns. The display's 3 milliseconds response time further minimizes ghosting, which is a real win if you're playing competitive esports where every millisecond counts. However, the panel's brightness tops out around 300 nits, which is decent for indoor lighting but can feel washed out in bright rooms or near windows. If you plan to game on a sunny balcony or a well-lit office, you might find yourself cranking up the backlight and losing some of that subtle HDR detail the QHD panel can otherwise deliver. That's a trade-off you can live with if you usually game in a darker environment, but it's worth noting. Heat and noise are another practical concern. A laptop packing an i9 and an RTX 4070 inevitably generates heat. ASUS uses a dual-fan, vapor chamber cooling system that does a respectable job, keeping the CPU under 85°C during sustained gaming sessions. The fans spin up noticeably, and you'll hear a low whirring that can be distracting if you're trying to focus on a story-driven game or a conference call. In my tests, the fan stayed below 45 dBA, which is louder than a typical office environment but not as aggressive as some older gaming laptops. If you're sensitive to fan noise while streaming or recording, consider investing in a cooling pad or keeping the laptop on a hard surface to aid airflow. Battery life is another area where expectations need to be tempered. With the high-performance components, the Strix G16 averages about 4 hours of mixed usage, roughly a couple of hours of gaming, a little bit of office work, and some browsing. That's comparable to other gaming laptops in this class, but it's far from the 8+ hours you'd get from a fine and light Ultrabook. If you need a machine that lasts through a full day of meetings plus a quick gaming session, you'll still be tethered to a charger. The downside here isn't a flaw so much as a reality of the hardware. The i9 and RTX 4070 simply draw more power than a mid-range laptop would. Storage and expandability are where this model truly shines. A 2 TB NVMe SSD means you can install several massive games: Microsoft Flight Simulator, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Starfield without worrying about hitting a wall. The SSD is also upgradable, and because ASUS leaves the additional slots accessible, You can add another drive later if you ever need more space. This future-proofs the laptop for a few years, meaning you won't be forced into a costly swap when your game library swells. Another practical perk is the inclusion of Windows 11 Pro and a lifetime Office license. For gamers who also juggle spreadsheets, presentations, or need the Pro version's remote desktop capabilities, this adds genuine value. You don't have to shell out for separate software subscriptions, and the licensing is tied to the hardware, which,